Hi everyone, it's your boy Hardcorn, and today we're going to be looking at the Time 5 VR game mode. I'll start off with something simple. We're not going to be talking about builds in this. This is tips and concepts to increase your chances of success. VR is where experimentation, investment, and understanding meet. You're going to need a good grasp on all of them. This will test your ability, but mostly your patience. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe. Let's talk about VR itself. You access it through the arena page. When you're there, you're met with a screen detailing that week's boss. That boss shown will determine what type of enemy faced, and also what kind of specialty weapon is going to be in the shop. Inside the shop, you have two tabs. One is the VR shop, where you will always have the same items such as recovery, boosters, and upgrades. The other is the random shop. It changes every 6 hours to 4 purchasable random items. You can check the contents of the random shop's pool, and the random shop is something to keep an eye on very often as it has multiple purchasable copies of upgrade materials per day and per week, as denoted by the D or W letter next to the price. Another reason is to keep an eye on it for the specialty weapons that only appear in that shop. The specialty weapons rotate every week and will only work with specific characters. These weapons have powerful offensive and defensive capabilities inside to make fighting enemies easier. You get 1 copy a week in the random shop for 30,000 coins, which is a minimum of 5 weeks of that specific boss during its rotation. There is an option to reset the random shop as well at your leisure for a small gem cost. Going into the VR page meets you with a scrollable list of stages and a leaderboard. Choose challenge and you're greeted with 3 character slots, toggleable boosters, AI character toggles, drops, HP, boss information, team sets, and formations. These stages are where you fight and go make your money. You clear one and you'll unlock more. Between 1 to 4 stages can be unlocked based on the mission's time to complete. Boosters are the same kind as Arena, HP and attack, but they use their own VR resource so you can't use Arena ones. Formations are the supporter setups for passive effects. Toggles for AI characters are to enable or disable certain combat behaviors. Drops are self-explanatory. Boss information details what aspects the boss carries innately and cannot be changed. Then there's characters. You can only play VR with 3 characters. The decision making here is pretty important since now it's no longer singles, it's a team effort. There are obviously characters better than others and worse too. Let's get into the character side first. There are a few things to look for when you're choosing a character. Healing and debuffs are very important. Any character that has one or the other, or both, are extremely valuable. Characters like Murasaki with her powerful slows and healing, and Felicia with her debuffs and group healing are highly desired. The character HP bar listed isn't for show. Characters don't heal after completing a mission, unless you use a resource to do so from the menu, or an event is occurring. Also, when characters die, they are dead until you use a resource to revive them, or the next daily reset. This, and the immense damage enemies can do, is why healing is much more valuable than ever. Characters inside the stage itself are controlled by either you or the AI, so it's important to consider their behaviors and how they shape up against enemies. You can switch at any time, but it's on a 10-second cooldown to the next time you can do it. A good rule of thumb is 2 ranged and 1 melee. This way your melee that you are using can act as a blocker and get their attention, while the range stays away and grinds the enemies down. You gotta experiment, you really do. This is just one idea that can work, and other ideas sure can too. Character AI is very limited, but understands that they must destroy the target at all costs, for better or worse. Which means you must account for this simplicity. Ranged characters that have far-reaching skills are very good for AI because they tend to stay out of the way for melee characters, and also the boss. Sora, Micah, and Emily do a pretty good job at this. Try some other ranged characters and see how they fare with your setups. Characters that you must play can really be anybody. They usually end up boiling down to doing something specific that the AI won't do, or do at the wrong time, like Murasaki tentacle anchor chaining, or any of Astaroth's skills due to their long startups. By driving a character, you can ensure at your leisure when and where you want to make a big push, or get defensive. Now onto more specific aspects. Weapons are very important. Their effects can determine longevity and ease of the battle itself. Taking your biggest, strongest 5/5 UR weapons can and will work. However, more niche weapons can find places on the battlefield too. Criticals and their damage are heavily reduced in VR, so the Momochi weapons are less effective along with crit rate and crit damage weapons. The higher you go on floors, the less chance you have to crit inherently. So there's no reason to take those in the first place because they just fall off so quickly. Now those racial specific SR weapons, those too also have a place. Being SR weapons, they're cheap finds, and thanks to enchantments, they can do incredible things. Building a character to do something specific like being a demon or human racist for when the week comes up is a very lucrative strategy. The one less Magatama slot does hurt a little alongside being lower stat-wise due to being an SR. Check your clear times and your average damage in your head to see if it really is an improvement against other URs. But in the end, it's still reasonably cheap than trying to lust after a UR weapon from the gacha. After farming for a long time, you too can attain the coveted VR exclusive weapons befitting specific characters. They usually have specific skill boosts alongside racial damage and defense. They're very good and very expensive. Now I want to talk about Magatamas. VR introduces the UR Magatamas, and also the needed materials to end SRs into URs. UR Magatamas have the same buff pool, but add in Fortitude and Penetration. UR Magatamas also require a UR resource gotten through VR and a few other means to reroll effects. It's recommended to roll your passive effects when they're still an SR because it's much easier and cheaper. Maxed UR Magatamas gain the ability to roll for an extra attribute that contributes to a set. Said sets are very niche, but very helpful. Those sets should be the very last thing you should worry about in terms of making your character builds. Magatamas themselves are extremely important for VR. What you're really after is racial damage or racial defense. You have to get specific to survive. Flat possible 60% damage to a single enemy type, or 60% defense to a type, and then adding in awakenings and other stat boosts is a very substantial boon. I won't lie to you, it's an extremely resource intensive and time consuming process to make even one set for 1 week. However, it is one of the simpler ways to give your characters more damage and more longevity on the cheap. When you're out farming, you want clearing power, so you get the attack up racials. When you're going for progression, racial defense starts to show its value, protecting from huge damage in higher floors. Enchantments are just as important. However, they are much more expensive to accomplish due to the resources coming from daily secret missions and grinding up weapons and supporters. You don't need to race to the end and get a 15 weapon or plus 15 per supporter across the board. You can farm with minimal enchantments and in some cases none, depending on what you're doing. Budget ideas would be to go to +5 since at that level, it's just 25% more base stats. It's low cost, a solid success rate to get there in the first place. Don't got a red hot 5/5 supporter? That's okay. This is what enchantments are made for, so you can bolster those stats and use them. Supporters, I will say this much, since that is a whole video upon itself. Obviously build for the boss you're facing, and also the team you're with. Don't be afraid to totally change or hybridize your builds. Getting angry and then stop thinking doesn't make any progress for any of us. Now, farming is simple. You pick a stage in your capability, and you beat the crap out of it. Whether that floor is floor 10 or floor 40 depends on your setup and what you feel comfortable with. I found that floor 19 is a comfortable spot to farm on all bosses, as it only has 3 low-level debuffs to deal with, and the bosses and enemies are mostly weak. You can take your all-in build and just make a mess of the mooks. That is where I'm comfortable at the farm. I could go higher, but it's inconsistent. Consistency is very important to your farming experience. If you're blowing down the doors on the boss in a minute, and your characters are staying healthy with minimal concentration from you, that's very important. Keep doing what you're doing. Numbers and strategy can be argued all day, but if you're having to constantly stay on edge and pray you're going to make it while you're supposed to be farming, you're going to stop doing this very quickly. That's why you go for a consistent, comfortable floor, which is why I go to 19. So let's take a look at debuffs. There are random debuffs rolled every time you play a stage. They're the same kind that you'd see in secret missions. However, VR likes to add a couple of new ones. After every 10 steps up to about floor 60, they add in one more slot for explicit debuffs. On each of the 10 steps, the pool of debuffs increases along with their strength. There are some very potent rolls that will just decimate your team or barely affect them at all. This is part of what makes VR so hard in the first place, but it isn't impossible. Supporter/skill cooldown increased on hit is a very painful one to roll. Damage is an inevitability whether it's from an arena effect, the boss, or the enemies that spawn. Each time you take a hit, the chance for the supporter or skill's cooldown rolls. For the player, since you can dodge much easier, it's not the worst thing in the world. However, the AI gets absolutely screwed by this because they just sit there and eat hits all day. It's a major impact to your damage and safety, since skills are taking way longer to come out. When you start getting into the 40s, you're going to be dealing with the debuff Assist, Protect, or Suppress characters attack down. This can roll on just about every slot at that point, so it's doable to actually have all 3 colors have their damage halved or beyond just for simply existing. Now that we've covered basics and various tips, we're going to move on to the practical portion, which is the battles themselves. Those are going to be their own features, so I'll see you there. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe so we can get those bad boys out there sooner enough.